So I'm going to break this up into two recordings. So here in this first recording, we're going to look at ethical theories, and then in the second one, we will complete a value hierarchies activity. So these are to help us to consider the ethical base through which social movements may draw upon for their methods. And the value hierarchy will allow us to kind of envision what morals we hold most closely to ourselves and how those might influence the causes that we're drawn to and the actions that we choose to take within those. So if you go on to Canvas and follow the link to the ethical framework summary, I'd like you just to focus on the various theories that it discusses. The rest of it could provide some good investigation if you're going to explore an ethical decision more deeply, but just look at the theories here. So within this summary, the page states that ethics provides a set of standards for behavior that helps us decide how we ought to act in a range of situations. In a sense, we can say that ethics is all about making choices and about providing reasons why we should make those choices. So this is kind of our rationalization for our choices. So it breaks them up into several areas. So we have consequentialist theories. So these deal with the consequences of choices. They include utilitarianism. So this asks us to weigh the benefits of a decision against the bad results that might happen, right? So we should choose an action that might have the greatest benefit with the least overall harm. This one's frequently used. There are some issues with it that we can talk about together. Egoism kind of situates utilitarianism in an individualistic sense, and it's basically asking the question, what will be the best for me, right? What will bring me the greatest benefit and least overall harm? Now, the common good approach kind of takes a different stance. And this is looking at choices that should be made in the best interest of the community or society as a whole. So this is especially considering compassion for the most vulnerable. So it's saying, how will this decision affect people who are on the greatest margins of society, right? Is everyone being taken care of? How will this choice affect the most vulnerable? So perhaps, how will this decision affect homeless people? How will it affect people who don't have health insurance? These kinds of things. Now, the non-consequentialist theories think about intention rather than consequence. So what do you hope will happen? What is behind motivating you? So there's the duty-based approach. So this is theorized most famously by Immanuel Kant, that looks at people's personal will and their intention. So he argued that doing what is right is not about what may happen as a result of it, which we really don't have control over, but it's having proper intention in doing it and in carrying it out. And he also looks at responsibility, and he says we should do what's right because it is our responsibility or our duty to do so and to be moral. Now, the rights approach thinks of decisions in terms of respecting the rights of others. So the best decision should respect others' personal dignity, right? It should not take away from their rights. So in this approach, you should act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether your own person or the person of another, always like as an end and never a means to an end. So we should not think like, well, we have to railroad over everybody's rights. We have to kind of squash all of this for now because to get to our ultimate goal. And this is saying, no, we have to respect those at all times. The fairness or justice approach. So in this approach, it says everyone should be treated equally. and that rules or laws should be applied equally to everybody. There should be no exceptions, right? And that the rational choice makers should make decisions from a point of equality. So thinking about how will this apply to everyone. The divine command approach, and in the fairness and justice approach, I see that as kind of reflecting a more equal society and not saying, well, certain classes of people should be exempt from something. So the divine command approach is saying whatever God's will is what's ethical. So we should follow what kind of God or fate is deciding, and acknowledging that that could change at any time, right? That's beyond people's control. And then finally, we have agent-centered theories. So with agent-centered theories, there's the virtue approach. So agent-centered is kind of looking at people's power within the decision-making process. So with the virtue approach, ethical action should be consistent with the ideal human virtue, right? Whatever we decide that may be in that situation. So meaning we should do what we feel someone who holds those virtues would do. So what would the bravest person do in this situation? What would the most caring person do? Maybe what would the most level-headed person do? So we think of our ideal and we say, how can we make choices based on who we want to be? And then the feminist approach is really looking at making sure that groups that are often left out of decision-making processes, groups that may be considered marginalized, are important, that their experiences are considered and they are included in that process. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the ethics of care, and that really the effects of a decision on everybody really should be considered deeply. And if you then follow the link to the clip on ethics of care, the ethics of care looks at moral action as something that should center on interpersonal relationships, right? On our dependence on one another, and that caring for one another, doing things that will lift others up, benevolence is a virtue. So within this, there's several important tenets that people are understood to have various degrees of dependence and interdependence on one another. So we should consider how an action that I take may affect other people who are involved in my life, right? Also, that other individuals who are affected by the consequences of one's choice deserve to be considered in proportion to their vulnerability, right? So maybe a choice may be made and it can affect one group of people in one way, but the consequences of it could be magnified out towards other groups more deeply. And so how can we kind of try to make sure that we're reducing that harm that may happen to other groups of people? And then finally, situational details determine how to safeguard and promote the interest of those involved, right? So think about each situation really carefully. How can this situation be thought about in a way that's going to give deep consideration to all of the consequences and make it more of a safe process?